Are we back? Are we back? Are we back? Are we back? It would appear we're live. Can I... Are we back? It would appear we're live. Okay, cool. I'm just gonna tweet real quick. Theory Simps, log on. Fuck. No. What? Bitches. I showered. That's the surprising bit, is that I showered. Okay. If it's too laggy, let me know. I really can't tell. Because I think it's just going to be lagging no matter what. It looks fine on my phone, but... Alright, I'm going to start, because there's some people here. Alright, so we finished last time reading Bloch's essay against Lukács, and we're going to continue now with Lukács, and I think this is his response to Bloch. And even though one of Bloch's critiques was that we don't have... that, like, Lukács is, like, saying everything without giving us, like, his is an essay on an essay on an essay, or something like that. But that's what Bloch's critique became, interestingly enough. And so now Lukács is responding to Bloch's critique of him. We'll see how it goes. This one's a bit longer, and then we get Brecht, which I'm very excited for. I have been meaning to just read Brecht's piece in here, because it's quoted heavily elsewhere. Yeah, I might not be on for long because I'm going to go make dinner soon, but I just wanted to start reading this. So, Georgy Lukács, Realism in the Balance. In its day, the revolutionary bourgeoisie conducted a violent struggle in the interest of its own class. It made use of every means at its disposal, including those of imaginative literature. What was it that made the vestiges of chivalry the object of universal ridicule? Cervantes' Don Quixote. Don Quixote was the most powerful weapon in the arsenal of the bourgeoisie in its war against feudalism and aristocracy. The revolutionary proletariat could do with at least one little Cervantes, laughter, to arm it with a similar weapon, laughter and applause. Georgy Dimitrov, speech given during an anti-fascist evening in the Writers' Club in Moscow. Right, go off, Dimitrov, fuck. Anyone intervening at this late stage in the debate on expressionism in Das Wort finds finds himself faced with certain difficulties. Many voices have been raised in passionate defense of expressionism, but as soon as we reach the point when it becomes imperative to specify whom we are to regard as the exemplary expressionist writer, or even to include in the category of expressionism, we find that opinions diverge so sharply that no single name can count on general agreement. One sometimes has the feeling, particularly when reading the most impassioned apologias, that perhaps there was no such thing as an expressionist writer. Since our present dispute is concerned not with the evaluation of individual writers, but with general literary principles, it is not of paramount importance for us to resolve this problem. Literary history undoubtedly recognizes a trend known as expressionism, a trend with its poets and its critics. I'm just going to check what's being cut off on this page, because some shit's getting cut off. No, we did. In the discussion which follows, I shall confine myself to questions of principle. 1. First, a preliminary question about the nature of the central issue. Is it really a conflict between modern and classical or even neoclassical literature, as has been implied by a number of writers who have concentrated their attack on my critical activities? I submit that this way of posing the question is fundamentally wrong. Its implicit assumption is that modern art is identical with the development of specific literary trends leading from naturalism and impressionism via expressionism to surrealism. In the article by Ernst Bloch and Hans Eisler in Neue Weltbühne, to which Peter Fischer refers, 1. E. Bloch and H. Eisler, Die Kunst zu erben in die Neue Weltbühne, 1938, to which Peter Fischer refers, this theory is formulated in a particularly explicit and apodictic way. When these writers talk of modern art, its representative figures are taken exclusively from the ranks of the movements just referred to. Let us not pass judgment at this stage. Let us rather inquire, can this theory provide an adequate foundation for the history of literature in our age? At the very least, it must be pointed out that a quite different view is tenable. The development of literature, particularly in capitalist society and particularly at capitalism's moment of crisis, is extraordinarily complex. Nevertheless, to offer a crude oversimplification, we may still distinguish three main currents in the literature of our age. These currents are not, of course, entirely distinct, but often overlap in the development of individual writers. 1. Openly anti-realist or pseudo-realist literature which is concerned to provide an apologia for and a defense of the existing system. Of this group we shall say nothing here. 2. So-called avant-garde literature. We shall come to authentic modern literature in due course, from naturalism to surrealism. What is its general thrust? We may briefly anticipate our findings here by saying that its main trend is its growing distaste from and progressive dissolution of realism. 3. The literature of the major realists of the day. For the most part, these writers do not belong to any literary set. They are swimming against the mainstream of literary development. In fact, against the two currents noted above, as a general pointer to the complexion of this contemporary form of realism, we need only mention the names of Gorky, Thomas, and Heinrich Mann and Roman Roland. In the articles which leap so passionately to the defense of the rights of modern art against the presumptuous claims of the so-called neoclassicists, these leading figures of contemporary literature are not even mentioned. They simply do not exist in the eyes of modern literature and its chroniclers. In Ernst Bloch's interesting work, Erbschaft dieser Zeit, a book rich both in information and in ideas, in the name of Thomas Mann, the name of Thomas Mann only occurs only once, unless my memory deceives me. The author refers to Mann's and Wassermann's bourgeois refinement, soigniert. So what the fuck is that even a German word? Soignierte Bürgerlichkeit. Soignierte Bürgerlichkeit. And with that he dismisses the matter. Views such as these turn the entire discussion on its head. It is high time to put back on its feet and take up cudgels on behalf of the of the best modern literature against its ignorant detractors. So the terms of the debate are not classics versus modernists. Discussion must focus instead on the question, which are the progressive trends in the literature of today? It is the fate of realism that hangs in the balance. Hi, Ava. Welcome. 2. One of Ernst Bloch's criticism of my old essay on expressionism is that I devoted too much attention to the theoreticians of the movement. Perhaps he will forgive me if I repeat this mistake here, and this time make his critical remarks on modern literature the focal point of my analysis. For I do not accept the view that the theoretical descriptions of artistic movements are unimportant, even when they make statements that are theoretically false. Is this a defense of realism via anti-capitalism? I would say so. That was, or kind of vice versa. The inverse of what you said. It's more a defense of anti-capitalism via realism. Or more so anti-fascism. But we're getting there. You didn't miss much. He hasn't said much already. But this is Lukács responding to Ernst Bloch, who wrote an essay kind of attacking Lukács's way of describing expressionism. And so Bloch was kind of saying that there's like, let me go back. Bloch was kind of saying that that Lukács didn't really say anything important, and that his essay missed a lot. And so Bloch actually was kind of saying that expressionism was made itself easily appropriatable by the Nazis, and actually the way Lukács described it was like as a predecessor to Nazism, or at least realism in the way that expressionism being easily, I don't want to say appropriated again, but appropriated by the Nazis, or as like a precursor to it, whereas there was kind of the idea that it was expressionism being subtextually anti-war, even though it wasn't implicitly anti-war. But like Bloch was saying that wasn't enough of a critique, essentially. And so Lukács is going, I don't know if he's going to try to address that critique necessarily. We'll see. But that bit was interesting. Let me go back to Bloch for a second. But Bloch defended expressionism because it was like actually popular literature, and whereas expressionist films were kind of like Nazi-esque in that they led to appropriation. Like Goebbels apparently defended, let me see if I can find that quote about Goebbels. That might have been the first bit I underlined. Let me just search for Goebbels. Oh, that's Goebbels. No, go. Yeah, okay. This bit right here. Lukács was indeed significantly more circumspect than they. He insisted on the conscious tendencies of expressionism were not fascist, and that in the final analysis, expressionism could only become a minor component of the fascist synthesis. But in his summing up, he also observed that the fascists were not without justification in discerning expressionism as a heritage they could use. Goebbels said he found some seeds of sound ideas in there, and in that sense, because expressionism has the like a rationalist mythology, it was therefore able to be appropriated by the Nazis and able to expound their ideology more coherently, I guess, or as a vehicle for it. But I'll continue here. 2. One of Ernst Bloch's criticisms of my old essay on expressionism is that I devoted too much time, etc. For I do not accept the view that the theoretical descriptions of artistic movements are unimportant, even when they make statements that are theoretically false. Okay. It is at such moments that they let the Let the cat. So what is it? Let the cat out of the bag and reveal the otherwise carefully concealed secrets of the movement. Since as a theoretician Bloch is of quite a different stature than Picard or Pintus were in their day, it is not unreasonable for me to examine his theories in somewhat greater depth. Bloch directs his attack at my view of totality. We may leave out an account of the extent to which I just saw a butterfly. We may leave out of account the extent to which his attack, which he interprets my position correctly. What is at issue is not whether I am right or whether he has understood me correctly, but the actual problem under discussion. The principle to be refuted, he believes, is the undiluted objective realism which characterizes classicism. According to Bloch, my thought is premised throughout on the idea of a closed and integrated reality. Whether such a totality in fact constitutes reality is open to question. If it is, then expressionist experiments with disruptive and interpolative technique are but an empty jeu d'esprit, as are the more recent experiments with montage and other devices making for discontinuity. Bloch regards my insistence on a unified reality as a mere hangover from the systems of classical idealism, and he goes on to formulate his own position as follows. What if authentic reality is also discontinuity? Since Lukács... he's quoting. I was like, why is he talking about himself in third person? Since Lukács operates with a close, objectivist conception of reality, when he comes to examine expressionism, he resolutely sets his fate against any attempt on the part of artists to shatter any image of the world, even that of capitalism, any art which strives to exploit the real fissures in surface interrelations and to discover the new in their crevices, appears in his eyes merely as a willful act of destruction. He thereby equates experiment in demolition with the condition of decadence. That was Bloch talking about Lukács being quoted by Lukács. Here we have a coherent theoretical justification of the development of modern art, one which goes right to the heart of the ideological issues at stake. Bloch is absolutely right. A fundamental theoretical discussion of these questions would raise all the problems of the dialectical materialist theory of reflection, Abbildlehre. Needless to say, we cannot embark on such a discussion here, although I personally would greatly welcome the opportunity to do so. In the present debate, we are concerned with a much simpler question, namely, does the close integration of the totality of the capitalist system of bourgeois society with its unity of economics and ideology really form an objective whole, independent of consciousness? Among Marxists, and in his latest book, yeah, right? Classic. Among Marxists, and in his latest book, Bloch has stoutly proclaimed his commitment to Marxism. There should be no dispute on this point, Marx says, the relations of production of every society form a whole. We must underscore the word every here, since Bloch's position essentially denies that this totality applies to the capitalism of our age. So, although the difference between our views seems to be immediate, formal, and non-philosophical, one which revolves instead around disagreement about the socio-economic interpretation of capitalism. Nevertheless, since philosophy is a mental reflection of reality, important philosophical disagreements must be implicit in it. Yeah, I know, he's literally just like, we need to do this thing, but we can't do that now, so we'll do this other thing that's simpler. And it's like, okay, my dude. It goes without saying that our quotation from Marx has to be understood historically. Yeah, as am I. I mean, I think inherently. But, which is, I think we side with Bloch currently. I'm interested to see what Lukács is even going to say. Because, I mean, you would think Lukács would be like, dialectically, any totality consists in discontinuity, but I guess he doesn't think so. Or like in fragmentation, like particular, universal, that kind of like Hegelian thinking, but I guess not. But these changes consist largely in the way in which all the various aspects of the economy are expanded and intensified, so that the totality becomes ever more closely knit and substantial. Yeah, I agree. After all, according to Marx, the decisive progressive role of the bourgeoisie in history is to develop the world market, thanks to which the economy of the whole world becomes an objectively unified totality. Fair. But, like, again, they exist independent of everything else, but they exist in cohabitation with everything else. I don't know. There's, like, he's focusing on that one side of the dialectic, which is, I guess, fair, but, like, mediate, my man. Primitive economies create the superficial appearance of a great unity. Primitive communist villages or towns in the early Middle Ages are obvious examples. But in such a unity, the economic unit is linked to its environment and to human society as a whole, only by a very few threads. Under capitalism, on the other hand, the different strands of the economy achieve a quite unprecedented autonomy, as we can see from the examples of trade and money. An autonomy so extensive that financial crises can arise directly from the circulation of money. Yeah. As with, what is that? What page am I on, 32? As a result of the objective structure of this economic system, the surface of capitalism appears to disintegrate into a series of elements all driven towards independence. Obviously, this must be reflected in the consciousness of men who live in this society. We live in this society, and hence to the consciousness of poets and thinkers. There we go. Consequently, the movement of its individual components towards autonomy is an objective fact of the capitalist economic system. Nevertheless, this autonomy constitutes only one part of the overall process. The underlying unity, the totality, of all whose parts are objectively interrelated, manifests itself most strikingly in the fact of crisis. I'd agree with that. Marx gives the following analysis, and also I'm reading from the physical book I have because a lot of this scan gets cut off at the end, and I just want to make sure I'm getting the words right. Marx gives the following analysis of the process in which the constituent elements necessarily achieve independence. Since they do in fact belong together, the process by means of which the complementary parts become independent must inevitably appear violent and destructive. The phenomenon in which the unity of discrete objects makes itself felt is the phenomenon of crisis. The independence assumed by processes which belong together and complement each other is violently destroyed. The crisis thus makes manifest the unity of processes which had become individually independent. 2. See Capital, Volume 1, page 209. These, then, are the fundamental objective components of the totality of capitalist society. Every Marxist knows that the basic economic categories of capitalism are always reflected in the minds of men, directly, but always back to front. That's interesting. Applied to our present arguments, this means that in periods when capitalism functions in a so-called normal manner and its various processes appear autonomous, people living within capitalist society think and experience it as unitary, whereas in periods of crisis, when the autonomous elements are drawn together into unity, they experience it as disintegration. With the general crisis of the capitalist system, the experience of disintegration becomes firmly entrenched over long periods of time in broad sectors of the population, which normally experience the various manifestations of capitalism in a very immediate way. 3. What has all this to do with literature? Nothing at all for theory. Like those of expressionism or surrealism, which denies that literature has any reference to objective reality. Yeah, no, I agree. It feels very true right now. That's why I'm laughing. I'm like, oh shit. It means a great deal, however, for a Marxist theory of literature. If literature is a particular form by means of which objective reality is reflected, then it becomes of crucial importance for it to grasp that reality as it truly is, and not merely to confine itself to reproducing whatever manifests itself on the surface. If a writer strives to represent reality as it truly is, i.e., if he is an authentic realist, then the question of totality plays a decisive role, no matter how the writer actually conceives the problem intellectually. Interesting. Lenin repeatedly insisted on the practical importance of the category of totality. In order to know an object thoroughly, it is essential to discover and comprehend all of its aspects, its relationships, and its mediations. We shall never achieve this fully, but insistence on all-round knowledge will protect us from errors and inflexibility. I like that bit. The literary practice of every true realist demonstrates the importance of the overall objective social context and the insistence on all-round knowledge required to do it justice. The profundity of the great realist, the extent and the endurance of his success, depends in great measure on how clearly he perceives, as a creative writer, the true significance of whatever phenomenon he depicts. This will not prevent him from recognizing, as Bloch imagines, that the surface of social reality may exhibit subversive tendencies which are correspondingly reflected in the minds of men. The motto to my old essay on expressionism underscores the fact that I was anything but unaware of this factor. That motto, a quotation from Lenin, begins with these words: "The inessential, the apparent, the surface phenomenon vanishes more frequently, is less solid, less firm than the essence." Interesting. Okay. However, what is at issue here, above all, is not the mere recognition that such a factor actually exists in the context of totality. It is even more important to see it as a factor in this totality, and not magnify it into the sole emotional and intellectual reality. So the crux of the matter is to understand the correct dialectical unity of appearance and essence. Okay, that's what he's getting at. What matters is that the slice of life shaped and depicted by the artist and re-experienced by the reader should reveal the relations between appearance and essence without the need for any external commentary. We emphasize the importance of shaping, gestalten, this relation because, unlike Bloch, we do not regard the practice of left-wing surrealists as an acceptable solution to the problem. We reject their method of inserting, Einmontierung, these into scraps of reality with which they have no organic connection. By way of illustration, just compare the bourgeois refinement of Thomas Mann with the surrealism of Joyce. Okay, here we go. No. Stream of consciousness. You're posting cringe, Lukács. In the minds of the heroes of both writers, we find a vivid evocation of the disintegration, the discontinuities, the ruptures, and the crevices, which Bloch very rightly thinks typical of the state of mind of many people living in the age of imperialism. Bloch's mistake lies merely in the fact that he identifies this. Yeah. Bloch's mistake, where was I? He identifies this state of mind directly and unreservedly with reality itself. He equates the highly distorted image created in this state of mind with the thing itself, instead of objectively unraveling the essence, the origins, and the mediations of the distortion by comparing it with reality. In this way, Bloch does as a theorist exactly what the expressionists and surrealists do as artists. Okay. Let us take a look at Joyce's narrative quote. Let us take a look at Joyce's narrative method. Let my hostile assessment put the matter in a false light. Lest my hostile assessment put the matter in a false light, I shall quote Bloch's own analysis. Quote, "Here, in and even beneath the flowing stream, we find a mouth without ego, drinking, babbling, pouring it out. The language mimes every aspect of this collapse. It is not a fully developed finished product, let alone normative, but open-ended and confused, the sort of speech with puns and slips of the tongue that you normally find at moments of fatigue, in pauses in the conversation, and in dreamy or slovenly people. It is all here, only completely out of control." I need to move up. The words have become unemployed, like me. The words have become unemployed. They have been expelled from their context of meaning. The language moves along, sometimes a worm cut in pieces, sometimes foreshortened like an optical illusion, while at yet other times it hangs down into the action like a piece of rigging. See, I like that, though. That is his account Here is his final evaluation. Quote, an empty shell and the most fantastic sellout, a random collection of notes on crumpled scraps of paper, gobbledygook, a tangle of slippery eels, fragments of nonsense, and at the same time the attempt to find a scholastic system on chaos, confidence tricks in all shapes and sizes, the jokes of a man who has lost his roots, blind alleys but paths everywhere, no aims but destinations everywhere. Montage can now work wonders. In the old days, it was only thoughts that could dwell side by side. 5. Allusion to celebrated lines in Schiller's Wallenstein's Tod, Act 2, Scene 2. The world is narrow, broad the mind, thoughts dwell easily side by side, things collide violently in space. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, he's kind of not addressing Bloch's criticisms of him. He's going in a different direction, which is like what you'd expect, I guess. And he's also not even quoting Bloch from what we just read. He's quoting Bloch from elsewhere, which is interesting. Though I guess he's quoting Bloch's source material more so of like where he did more concrete analysis. So that makes sense, I guess. But he's kind of... I don't know, it's strange because it's like... He prefers, let's say, like Joyce narrative as opposed to... I mean, Paul Celan hadn't written anything yet. But like, someone like Paul Celan. Give me, like, Hölderlin. Can you say Hölderlin wrote shit like that? I don't know. I don't know who you'd say would be writing fragmentary shit like this. Because, like, you know, I think fragmentary shit, I'm thinking, like, Dickinson. Let's say Dickinson. Even though that's a pretty basic example. And, you know, people have done more crazy stuff since. What year is this? When did Bloch write this? It doesn't say. Let me find in the back. Actually, it might say at the end of it. No, it doesn't. I wonder if I can Google it. Let me Google the title. Oh, fuck, I didn't. No. I searched wrong. I typed it in the middle of a URL. So it tried to search the whole URL with my little search terms in it, and it didn't work. 1938. So actually, I could see Ceylon having published. Ceylon publications. Yeah, no, he probably was definitely publishing by this time. Bibliography in German. His first book actually came out that year. Der Sand aus den Ohren. Interesting. Oh, absolutely. So like Hugo Ball, Tristan Tzara, Emmy Hennings was involved there, but like, you know, she's not as formally crazy, but content-wise, sure. Who else was in that crowd? Hugo Ball is probably who they're talking about. Yeah, Breton, even if it's not in German, they're probably talking about the French guys. They probably read the French guys. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Which is just like, I don't know, hadn't Voloshinov written by this time? Or Shklovsky? Oh yeah, Voloshinov like died 5 years prior. Um, so that's pretty crazy. Mm. Yeah, true. I mean, yeah. I'm trying to think. I might not have enough of a grasp on like that time period of material to like name people right now, but I agree that like there's clearly I think Bloch might get that more, even if he doesn't articulate it. Which I don't know. Do we actually get a response from Bloch later on? Uh, no, we don't, unfortunately. But we get Brecht and Benjamin, and I feel like Benjamin, and then we get Jameson at the end, um, who would probably definitely agree with us. Um, ooh, but yeah, no, I definitely agree, and hopefully he'll come around on that. I doubt he will though, because they're talking more about like the intrinsic politics of shit, meaning probably what its content is like vouching for politically, not really the like politics inherent in any given aesthetic, which I mean is what the book is probably aiming towards, which I think we'll get to. But interesting to say the least. Where the fuck was I? We've still got a while to go with Lukács, and I kind of want to get to Brecht. I really want to read the Brecht part. Um, oh, I get a notification. Yeah, also he's focused. Oh no, don't apologize. I like talking. What was I going to say? They also, this focuses way too much on narrative for my liking. I'd much rather talk about poetry, which Bloch looked like he wanted to, but like, none of these are going to go into actual poetics yet. Except maybe, I mean, Benjamin has his whole book on Baudelaire, and Brecht is an actual poet, so I feel like. Um, Yeah, I'm more in touch with what was happening in the 20s, but this is particularly interesting because it's like commenting a lot on what's happening without giving commentary on what's happening. Um, so it's a little tough to discern. But I feel like when was Cafe Voltaire happening? Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich. Or was that Paris? No, that's Zurich. Ooh, the top. 1916. Yeah, that was like the 20s. It closed in 1916. That was Heusenbeck, Zara, Arp, Teuber Arp, um, Ball and Hennings. Fucking, I remember reading the other day that Hugo Ball, when he would go up to fucking read his sound poems, he would get in his costume, his like cardboard Tin Man costume, and he would get so sweaty that by the end of his reading he would pass out and he would have to be carried off stage in a stretcher because it was too heavy for him to stand up in. And that just like, it's such absolute Chad energy. It's so powerful. I don't know how Emmy Hennings fucking stayed with him. Like, what the fuck? We were talking about that in class the other day, and I just absolutely lost my shit. It's so good. Oh, I should read some Hugo Ball on here. Maybe Flucht aus der Zeit or something. Do German and English, but the sound poems are exactly the same. That'd be good. That'd be a good bit. On page 35? I agree. I like the Dadaists a lot. I'm really only familiar with Ball. I'm actually translating Emmy Hennings right now. I just found digital copies of her manuscripts, and I went through and I photographed them, or like screenshotted them, and then I put them in a PDF last night. I might actually translate some of them live on here. That might be fun. Because she's interesting to translate. She's not too formally crazy, like I was saying, but she's interesting to say the least. And I really like her, and she's pretty. So, that's just me. Yeah, I forget what I read recently by Zara. I'm in a poetry of the avant-garde class right now, and so we recently finished with the Dadaists, and we mainly talked about Ball, but we definitely read some Zara. Didn't read any Hemmings, because even though Hemmings is Annie Hennings, sorry, Emmy Hennings. I just messed up her name. Even though she's like associated with the Dadaists and like is called like the Mama of Dada, I guess they don't consider her work Dadaist necessarily. Even though, like I said, content-wise, it's very probably more like Zara than Ball, in the sense that like it's disjunctive, but not formally, which is still cool. 35. Montage can now work wonders. In the old days, it was only thoughts that could dwell side by side. But now things. Yeah, we literally only had one class. It's terrible. The class only had 2 women on the syllabus, Gertrude Stein and HD, and they get their own day, because that's feminism. That's equality. We talk about the women on their own day. It's so silly. Not silly. It's sexist. And when I called out my teacher, he was like, "Oh, well, we'll talk about Lynn Haginian later." And I'm like, "Okay." And I like Lynn Haginian to some extent, but like, there's so many other women we could talk about. It's upsetting. Okay, I'll try to continue. I like just talking though. We found it necessary to quote this lengthy passage because of the highly important, even crucial role given to surrealist montage in Bloch's historical assessment of Expressionism. Earlier on in the book, we find him, like all apologists of Expressionism, making a distinction between its genuine and merely superficial exponents. How do you even say that when it's not math-related? According to him, the genuine aspirations of Expressionism live on, he writes, but even today there is no artist of great talent around without an Expressionist past, or at least without its highly variegated, highly storm-laden after effects. The ultimate form of Expressionism was created by the so-called Surrealists, just a small group, but once again, that is where the avant-garde is, and furthermore, Surrealism is nothing if not montage. It is an account of the chaos of reality as actually experienced, with all its caesuras and dismantled structures of the past. Again, I like Bloch more than fucking Lukács. But I mean, that's just because my poetics align more with Bloch, I think. The reader can see here very clearly in Bloch's advocacy of Expressionism. Bloch also isn't really advocating for Expressionism. I don't know why he's saying that. Just what he regards as the literary mainstream of our age. It is no less clear that his exclusion of every realist of importance from that literature is perfectly conscious. I hope that Thomas Mann will pardon me for making use of him here. As a counter-illustration. Let us call to mind his Tonio Krüger, or his Christian Buddenbrook, or the chief characters from The Magic Mountain. Let us further suppose that they had been constructed, as Bloch requires, directly in terms of their own consciousness, and not by contrasting that consciousness with a reality independent of them. It is obvious that if we were confronted merely by the stream of associations in their minds, the resulting disruption of the surface of life would be no less complete than in Joyce. Sorry. We should find just as many crevices as in Joyce. That's funny. Yeah, of course. But, like, saying that, I guess, would undermine both their arguments. Which is why they're put here, like, so we can synthesize them. But I agree. We should find just as many crevices as in Joyce. It would be a mistake to protest that these works were produced before the crisis of modernity. The objective crisis in Christian Bodenbrücke, for example, leads to a more profound spiritual disturbance than in Joyce's Heroes. The Magic Mountain is contemporary. Oh, I just realized how terrible the lighting is on me. Fuck. That's better. Yeah, forgive me. Forgive me for wanting to mediate my dialectics. Is that considered being a centrist if you're like, we need to synthesize? Fuck, what would Hegel say? Sorry, we know what Hegel would say. So if Thomas Mann had contented himself with the direct photographic record of the ideas and scraps of experience of these characters, and with using them to construct a montage, he might easily have produced a portrait as artistically progressive as the Joyce, whom Bloch admires so hugely. Hugely. Every other page I'm reading in the physical book, because it like cuts off a bit, really bad scan. Given his modern themes, why does Thomas Mann remain so old-fashioned, so traditional? Why does he choose not to clamber onto the bandwagon of modernism? Precisely because he is a true realist. A term which, in this case, signifies primarily that, as a creative artist, he knows exactly who Christian Buddenbrook and who Tonio Kröger and who Hans Castorp, Settembrini, and Nafta are. He does not have to know it in the abstract way that a social scientist would know it. In that sense, he may easily make mistakes as Balzac, Dickens, and Tolstoy did before him. He knows it after the manner of a creative realist. Okay, that's a new term. He knows how thoughts and feelings grow out of the life of society, and how experiences and emotions are part of the total complex of reality. Fair. As a realist, he can assign these parts to their rightful place within the total life context. He shows what area of society they arise from and where they are going to. So when, for example, Thomas Mann refers to Tonio Kröger as a bourgeois who has lost his way, he does not rest content with that. He shows how and why he is still a bourgeois. For all his hostility to the bourgeoisie, his homelessness within bourgeois society, and his exclusion from the life of the bourgeois, because he does all this, Mann towers as a creative artist and in his grasp of the nature of society, above all of those ultra-radicals who imagine that their anti-bourgeois models, their often purely aesthetic rejection of the stifling nature of a petty bourgeois existence, their contempt for plush armchairs or a pseudo-Renaissance cult in architecture, have transformed them into the inexorable foes of bourgeois society. The modern literary schools of the imperialist era, from naturalism to surrealism, which have followed each other in a swift succession, all have one feature in common. They all take reality exactly as it manifests itself to the writer and the characters he creates. The form of this immediate manifestation changes as society changes. These changes, moreover, are both subjective and objective, depending on modifications. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. in the reality of capitalism, and also on the ways in which class struggle and changes in class structure produce different reflections on the surface of that reality. It is these changes, above all, that bring about the swift succession of literary schools together with the embittered internecine. What is that word? Internecine? Internecine quarrels? I have no clue what that word is. That flare up between them. But both emotionally and intellectually, they all remain frozen in their own immediacy. They fail to pierce the surface, to discover the underlying essence. Yeah? One sec.